Hello, everyone. Welcome to Prince George's Community College Center for Performing Arts. My name is Richard Anatone. I'm a professor of music theory at the college, and I'd like to thank you all for joining us for our evening performance. I'd also like to thank everyone who came out today for this big event. This was a very large planning event with many moving pieces, many people on the faculty, the staff, the administration, and a lot of guests who have helped put this together. So my eternal gratitude for everyone who helped put today together. I'd also like to thank, yes. I'd also like to thank the orchestra for coming and having me give this talk on my favorite music of my favorite composer. And if you get a chance to look at the program, the orchestra will be performing a decent amount of music from the Final Fantasy series. And so I thought that would be a good opportunity for me to share some of the research that I've been doing on Nobuo Uematsu's music over the last 5 years. So this is going to be an abbreviated version of an article that will be published this upcoming fall in Music Theory Spectrum on the leitmotivic qualities and techniques of Nobuo Uematsu's soundtracks of the Super Nintendo Final Fantasy era. Now, if you don't know what Final Fantasy is, that's okay. You are among friends. This is a role-playing series, a role-playing game that was first put out by Square Enix in 1987. In a role-playing game, for those who have never played these kinds of games, they are very much like playing through a movie. Players explain or describe these games as if they were playing through a novel or if they're playing through a film. There's often a lot of character development, character dialogue, a lot of narration. It really combines the element of storytelling with traditional video gameplay. As a result, the composers to these soundtracks typically approach these games as if they were writing for film. And so we see a lot of overlap between film soundtracks and soundtracks written for the role-playing game genre. Now, although Final Fantasy is currently in its 16th iteration, the first 9 soundtracks were composed by Nobuo Uematsu. He joined the company Square in 1985. He wrote about 12 or so different video game soundtracks before being asked to write for Final Fantasy, which was the first role-playing game with that title for the Nintendo Entertainment System. After that, he wrote the next 8 soundtracks for the same title. So his soundtracks span early 8-bit, 16-bit, and even 32-bit console generation. As a composer for this kind of genre, beginning in the Super Nintendo era, his soundtracks really began to resemble film scoring. And that's evident in his treatment of character themes and what we call main themes. Now, while character themes are very straightforward in their association, it's a little bit more ambiguous when it comes to the main theme. The main theme has a very rich tradition that goes back to the 1920s and the early silent film era. A 1920 publication written by George West and Edith Lang titled Musical Accompaniment of Moving Pictures. This was a book specifically targeting pianists and organists who were playing music for silent film. And at the beginning of the book, they essentially lay out their plan and their ideas for these accompanists, and they describe what they call the main theme. And they describe the main theme as a melody that should reflect the mood of the main hero or heroine, and that it should appear at the title screen, recur throughout the story, and endure a decent amount of musical development and transformation upon each recurrence. And so the theme will come back over the course of the drama, but it will change to fit or subvert the narrative that's unfolding before the audience. It's literally the main theme, like the most prominent theme we hear in a film. So for Long and West, it's essentially a glorified character theme for the hero or for the heroine. And this has been confirmed in a recent corpus study put out by Mark Richards, who wrote an article recently in Music Theory Online, where he took a look at a bunch of music main themes over the course of the last century in Hollywood, and essentially discovered that they are more often than not being treated as a big character theme for the main hero. And so this is evident in a lot of film soundtracks, right? If you know Indiana Jones, the main theme to the franchise is a character theme for Indiana Jones. It's very straightforward. It's a little bit different when you have a cast of heroes, because at that point, a main theme can function one of two ways, often simultaneously. It can either function as a character theme for the leading protagonist, like the Star Wars theme. It resembles Luke Skywalker's character. But there are other instances in the film where it has nothing to do with Luke, but it represents the heroes united against the Empire. So even when Luke isn't on screen, or if he's not even in the picture, we still hear that theme. It resembles the heroes united against evil. Sometimes the main theme doesn't even resemble or represent, I should say, a character at all. And we hear this in the Harry Potter franchise. John Williams' famous soundtrack includes Hedwig's theme, which opens up the very first Harry Potter film. Musicologist Jamie Lynn Webster, in her dissertation, describes how this particular theme does not represent any particular character, but instead simply creates the mood or atmosphere of magic afoot. So when we hear the theme, we don't think about a character or Harry or any of his friends or allies. We just think that magic is in the air. And so it's a little bit more abstract than a simple character theme. And along the lines of abstract qualities, we sometimes hear a theme that represents a literary theme. So not even a character or a mood, but it represents a literary theme, like in The Lord of the Rings. Howard Shore's soundtrack to this trilogy begins with a melody called One Ring to Rule Them All. And this theme, although it represents the Ring of Power, it really represents the corruption and the evil and the temptation embedded within that ring. Musicologist Doug Adams, in his book on the music to Lord of the Rings, talks about how this theme is connected to many other themes in the film. And so it doesn't simply represent a thing, it represents a literary idea. And sometimes a film or a video game will include a secondary main theme. And so in the same film, Doug Adams explores how the Fellowship theme, which represents the entire cast of heroes, is treated on equal footing. And so there's really two main themes that are not only narratively opposed, but also musically opposed within the entire trilogy. When we look at Uematsu's main themes, we see a lot of overlap. They typically accompany the title credits, or the opening credits rather. It typically acts as world map music, so as players explore the world, they hear the same melody, the main theme in the background. It represents the characters typically as a whole, but also, similar to the Lord of the Rings idea, it represents the most significant literary theme of the game, whether it's redemption, or hope, or love, or friendship, or even something like letting go of the past and embracing the future. What's really interesting, what I've discovered over the last several years, is that Uematsu always connects the main theme to one character theme. And by doing so, he suggests that the character's personal journey, their personal narrative arc, is only a microcosm of the actual literary theme that's represented by the game's main theme. And so very briefly, within his 6 soundtracks for PlayStation and Super Nintendo, I found that there are essentially 5 techniques that Uematsu uses when he's connecting a main theme with a character theme. And so the first one I call eponymous omission. This is when a particular character either lacks let me rephrase that. It's when a character lacks exclusive musical representation. And this can occur one of 2 ways. Either a character out of many might lack their own character theme, or they might be the only character out of a cast of many who actually has a character theme. And the latter will actually suggest that that character has more literary significance because they are the only ones with musical representation. The second technique is I call motivic networking. This is when 2 themes, typically a main theme and a character theme, share small melodic or harmonic fragments. And so they're still independent themes, but they share maybe a 4 or 5 or 6 note melodic idea, or a very unique chord progression might be found embedded within both of those themes. The third technique I call thematic hybridization, and this is similar to motivic networking, but on a larger scale. In this case, entire phrases of 2 themes will be combined, and this typically occurs one of 3 ways. Either the phrase of one melody can be immediately followed by a phrase of another melody. The 2 melodies might be played on top of one another, so we hear both melodies at the same time, or Uematsu will take phrase 1 of one theme and answer it with phrase 2 of another theme, creating a unique theme comprised of 2 sections of 2 independent themes. The fourth technique is the double main theme technique, similar to what we see in Lord of the Rings. Typically, a character's theme will be on equal setting as the main theme, and through their interaction, we can decipher some interesting narrative meaning through the musical dialogue. And the last is really cool. I call this associative troping. This is when a main theme typically starts a main theme's association will shift over a period of time. And so it will usually be associated with a villain at the beginning of a story, and gradually it will shift its association towards a hero. And we see that in several of Uematsu's soundtracks. And so I will briefly discuss Final Fantasy IV, 5, and 6, and how these techniques interact with one another to help elevate or musically depict the game's underlying literary theme. Final Fantasy IV, a story of redemption. Final Fantasy V, a story of self-sacrifice. And Final Fantasy VI, a story of hope. Final Fantasy IV was first released for the Super Nintendo in 1991. It was the first game released for the Super Nintendo of the Final Fantasy series. It's a very simple story. It involves a character named Cecil Harvey and his seeking redemption for the crimes that he committed when he led the King's elite air force named the Red Wings. And so the beginning of the game, we see him carrying out some really heinous war crimes, even though he has some serious reservations about it. And he immediately questions his king and is immediately relieved from his duty for daring to speak out. And so Sean Atkinson, a music theorist who is also into video game music, he's acknowledged and described how the character theme for Cecil endures significant transformation. So it begins in a very dark and villainous way, and it transforms into one of hope and optimism. But what's really interesting is that this theme, Red Wings, associated with the villain and then essentially transformed into one of heroism, is also acting as the game's second main theme over the entire soundtrack. At the end of the soundtrack, at the end of the game, we see both of these themes interacting directly through the thematic hybridization technique. And so if we take a listen to the main theme to Final Fantasy IV, this melody is heard as players explore the world map. It's not very heroic. It's lyrical. It's more somber. It really doesn't associate with anything heroic throughout the game. It's simply just background music for a decent portion of the story. Red Wings is one of the first tracks that we hear in the entire game. This is where the Red Wings launch their attack on a group of helpless magicians so they can steal their crystal. And so it really doesn't begin with its association with the hero, because his valiant outward demeanor contradicts musically and visually what we're seeing occur on stage, or on screen, I should say. Sean Atkinson describes this as the dark military topic. We hear military marches, fanfares, but they're all corrupted. We hear a lot of dark harmonies, a lot of dissonant harmonies, a lot of tritones in the bass line. It creates this illusion of the evil empire rather than the heroic empire. Now, as Atkinson describes, about 3 hours into the game, Cecil has to essentially defeat his own Dark Knight self so he can become a glorified paladin knight. And so once he does that and transforms into a hero, that same melody returns, but instead of all of those harmonic corruptions, instead has bright harmonies. We have no dissonance. We have harp flourishes and cymbal crashes, all of the hallmarks of heroic music embedded within that same melody. It's at this point where we realize that the theme is directly associated with Cecil, not necessarily the evil of King Baron. But that theme is also used as a second main theme throughout the game. We hear it in instances completely unrelated to Cecil's redemptive arc. For instance, anytime a character joins the party, we hear that same melody just played a little bit more briefly and a little bit more heroically in the track titled Join the Party. It's also used in some more somber and more sad scenes. For instance, anytime a character sacrifices themselves, which it happens a few times, to save their allies, we hear that same track just played much more in a somber manner. But what's more important is that it is immediately followed by the main theme of the game through the thematic hybridization technique. And so he combines these two themes together to create one track called Cry in Sorrow. And so that's what we'll hear here as the two twins turn themselves into stone to prevent their allies from being destroyed. The thematic hybridization technique reaches its full climax at the end of the game when players finally beat the final boss, and we are rewarded with a very lengthy cinematic epilogue. During this scene, the Red Wings, which was originally a dark military march, is now presented in all of its glory in its paladin transformation. But instead of hearing its second phrase, it is answered with the second phrase of the main theme. And by doing so, Uematsu confirms that the redemptive nature of Cecil is the driving literary theme of the game. Final Fantasy V was released only 1 year later, but we also see a significant change in development in Uematsu's subtlety regarding these different compositional techniques. Final Fantasy V is a story of a bunch of heroes brought together by circumstance to save the world from having its crystals being destroyed. The three main characters are Butz, a young adventurer, Lena, the princess of Tycoon, and Faris, her estranged sister, who is now a pirate captain. About 2/3 of the story, way into the story, players learn that when Lena was a child, her mother was stricken with a fatal illness that could only be cured by using the tongue of an endangered species of dragon. And her mother's ultimate refusal to kill the last dragon to save her own life is what causes Lena to dedicate her entire life to saving the dragon species. At that point in her life, she learns what it means to be a true hero by sacrificing oneself for those who cannot protect themselves. Throughout the game, only Lena has musical representation. She is the only character in this entire cast who has a character theme. What's interesting about her theme is that her melody is derived motivically from the B section of the game's main theme. And what's more interesting is that her melody blossoms into a completely new independent track titled The Day Will Come, that we hear during that flashback that depicts her mother's fate. And so if we take a listen to the main theme to Final Fantasy V, this is what we hear at the title sequence. It's very heroic. It has all of the traits of heroic music. This is the A section. Now remember, the B section is a little bit different, so we'll just take a listen to the A section, which has all of those heroic traits. About 5 minutes into the game, we see an interesting scene where Lena's father goes to examine and investigate why the wind has stopped. He goes to see what happened to the Earth's crystals. At that point, the camera pans to the ocean and shows Ferris on her pirate ship. She notices that the wind has stopped. Now, we don't know who she is. We just see a random person noticing that wind has stopped. But during this scene, we hear the main theme played in a very ominous manner. And more importantly, it is played on the music box. When composers use music boxes, or if they use a glockenspiel, they're typically trying to invoke the idea of nostalgia, because those types of instruments are used when we're children, right? We're exposed to music boxes and little glockenspiels. And so musically or instrumentally, Uematsu is hinting at an interesting connection, perhaps, with this character and their past. So here is that main theme, but just played in an ominous manner. About 10 minutes into the game, we finally are formally introduced to Lena, the Princess of Tycoon. Her melody is very somber, or very, very lyrical, I should say. It's very sweet and innocent. It's played on the flute. What's interesting about her melody is that it is motivically derived from the B section of the game's main theme. Now, the B section of the main theme doesn't have that heroic trait. It actually has a more introspective and intimate quality to it. And so this is the B section to the game's main theme that we heard at the title sequence. And here is that same idea played as the opening phrase to Lena's theme. The music box in the background is a direct recall of the music box that we heard moments earlier when we saw that random pirate on the ocean, noticing that the wind has stopped. In this way, Uematsu connects the two characters through their shared past. The end of Lena's theme makes another recall of the main theme itself, played on the glockenspiel, accompanied by the music box. So again, this nostalgic element connecting both Ferris and Lena purely through instrumentation and using the same melodic ideas to create Lena's theme is evident. So here is the end of Lena's theme. So as I mentioned, about 2/3 of the way into the game, we learn what happened to Lena's mother when she was a child. This track that we hear during the flashback is titled The Day Will Come. What's interesting about this track is that the melody, although is its own independent melody, it is motivically derived from the B section of Lena's theme, which in turn was derived from the B section of the game's main theme. So here is the B section of Lena's character theme. And here is the melody, "The Day Will Come," that we hear during the flashback sequence. Ultimately, what we get is a really fascinating thematic cycle of independent yet related themes. The game begins with a heroic statement of the main theme's A section, moves into the B section, which is a little bit more intimate and introspective, whose motivic makeup is used to create the opening phrase to Lena's theme, which immediately recalls in a nostalgic manner the game's main theme. And of course, Lena's theme itself motivically blossoms into the track "The Day Will Come." The result is a really interesting semiotic effect. We essentially get 3 different puzzle pieces of a larger interpretive puzzle. At the onset of the game, it is only hinted at that Ferris and Lena have this kind of shared connection, and that's hinted at through the music, through the timbre of the glockenspiel, the timbre of the music box, and through those melodic fragments that are found in both the heroic section of the main theme and that nostalgic section of Lena's theme. And so over the course of the soundtrack, over the course of the game, we realize that heroism and nostalgia in fact have a connection that go right back to Lena's past, and that is ultimately revealed during the flashback sequence when we listen to the track "The Day Will Come." For a 1992 video game for Super Nintendo, I think that's fairly impressive. The last game that we'll look at is from Final Fantasy VI. This is the last track, or the last video game, I should say, for the Super Nintendo era that bears the Final Fantasy title. It's a fairly simple, straightforward story. A cast of heroes named the Returners are essentially a rebel alliance allied against the evil Emperor Gestal and his right-hand man, Kefka, who are hell-bent on world domination by extracting the magical abilities from these creatures called espers. The Returners are able to convince a woman named Tara Branford, who is a half-esper, half-human hybrid, who used to be under the mind control of the Emperor, to join their cause. She is deemed the only hope in defeating the Empire. And as we see throughout this 40-hour epic, hope is the literary theme. It's driving the story forward. In terms of the music, Nobuo Uematsu wrote 14 characters their own protagonist theme, and 2 villains also have their own villain theme. Interestingly enough, Terra, the only hope, is the only character in the entire game who lacks exclusive musical representation. Her theme is simply one of many transformations of the game's main theme. At the beginning of the game's main theme is actually associated with Emperor Gestal through a number of different ways. And over the entire epic, that shifts away from Gestal more toward Terra, which ultimately creates this really interesting effect that is revealed during the epilogue after players beat the game. Through this soundtrack, Uematsu musically depicts hope that the Rebel Alliance essentially sees in Terra. So before we talk about the main theme, we need to first look at a few of the traits of Emperor Gestal's music. There are 2 tracks that are associated with him. The first is called Catastrophe. It's the first track that we hear as we watch the prologue to the game. It has all of the hallmarks of villainy. We've got ominous bell tolls, chromatic harmonies descending in the strings. We've got tritones. We've got a lot of darkness, the Phrygian mode. Everything you can imagine is slammed into catastrophe. These traits, as we'll hear, are also found in his own character theme. So this is Catastrophe, which begins the entire game, Final Fantasy VI. About 20 minutes into the game, we hear Emperor Gestal's character theme for the first time. This occurs during a flashback that Terra has that recalls all of the horrors that the Empire made her commit. It has a lot of similarities to what we just heard. Those same chromatic descending lines, that same bell chime, all of these fanfares in a dark, dissonant, ironic inversion of heroic militarism. All of the traits of villainy can be found in Gestal's character theme, I should say. We encounter the main theme for the first time after about 5 minutes of gameplay. As many main themes do, it accompanies the opening credits of the game. It doesn't do anything to instill hope. It is not heroic, it is not optimistic, it's a little bit more somber, it's a beautiful melody, but it's a darker melody. It really doesn't do anything to align itself with any of the protagonists. Matter of fact, we even hear it while the Empire's army are launching an attack on the colliery town of Narsh so they can steal their Esper. What aligns this theme most with Emperor Gestal is its coda. The last few measures that conclude the theme have a few of the traits that we heard in Gestal's music. We hear dark fanfares played in the oboes, and we hear chromatic descending harmonies, which are typically traits of villainy. And so this is the short coda that concludes the main theme in the opening credits. So players are finally formally introduced to Terra about maybe 20 or so minutes into the game. But unlike every other character, she is formally introduced not with her character theme, but with the first transformation of the main theme called Awakening. Now this track is not exclusive to Terra, but it is used at significant points in the story when Terra learns about the evils and the horrors of the Empire, and when she agrees to meet with the leader of the resistance movement. Although the melody is played on the piano, we'll hear that in a moment, what's interesting about the track is its introduction. The introduction blends a few of the traits of Gestal's music with a few of the traits of Terra's music. The melody is played on the flute, which is the instrument most aligned with Terra, but the introduction has a bunch of harmonies that are inspired by the Phrygian mode, which is the mode that drives all of the music associated with Emperor Gestal. So here is the brief introduction to Awakening before the main theme proper comes in. Now, what's really fascinating about this is not how the main theme is played on the piano, but what's interesting is what's occurring in the background. And so this is the main theme as it appears in that track, Awakening. But rather than listening to the piano play the theme, listen to the strings in the accompaniment. You'll hear a short 4-note melodic passage that you can see that's boxed on the screen. Now, this short idea, as innocuous as it may seem, actually is derived from the accompaniment that we first heard in the opening title track of the main theme. Originally, it's only a 2-note motive that goes back and forth. But here in Awakening, as she comes out of her coma and is exposed to all of the horrors of the Empire, it blossoms into a 4-note melodic passage. Once Terra finally agrees to meet with the Resistance, we hear Terra's theme for the first time on the world map as we travel to meet the leader of the Resistance. Terra's theme is really not that much different than its presentation in the opening credits. There's only a few instrumental changes. The most significant change, however, is the inclusion of a brand new B section that is entirely unique unto her theme. This B section is incredibly hopeful. It's very optimistic. You've got these fanfare-like shapes played on the French horn. You've got cymbal crashes and timpani rolls, a rising trajectory, all of the hope that one might experience with the last remaining hope in defeating the Empire is found in the B section of Terra's theme. And so if you've been paying very close attention, you'll notice that that theme is derived out of the accompanimental figures that we heard not only in Awakening, but also in the opening title track. So originally it starts off with a 2-note oscillation of an interval of a third, and then it blossoms into a 4-note interval of a third, but still in the background as Terra is learning about the horrors of the Empire. And then when she finally agrees to help defeat the Empire, it blossoms into its own unique statement that instills into the player and to the heroes all of the hope that they see within her. Halfway through the game, the world blows up. Right? Kefka almost annihilates all life on the planet. I mean, it's true. I mean, it's terrible. It's almost like all hope is lost, because even musically, this theme never comes back. We never have that hope anymore until the very, very ending of the game when you actually finally defeat Kefka. And so you can see how on the left, the world of balance is accompanied by this optimistic music, while the world of ruin, after Kefka nearly destroys the planet, it's accompanied by a more somber track titled Searching for Friends. It seems as if all hope is lost. Finally, again, when the players defeat Kefka, they are rewarded with a 30-minute ending, the first part of which is an 11-minute sequence with a bunch of different vignettes that depict each character's fate, accompanied by their own character theme. During this sequence, Terra is visited by the spirit of her father, who tells her that espers have become eradicated from existence, but because she is part human, her love for humanity, her love of her allies, her love of her friends will allow her to remain alive as a human. Musically, we don't hear the main theme. Uematsu instead provides that B section in a very intimate and a very lyrical manner. All traits of heroic marches and militarism have been removed, and instead it has a much more spiritually transcendent feel to it. And so over the course of the game, Uematsu begins the main theme in the lower quadrant of heroic tragedy, shifts it toward heroic optimism, and then elevates it to one of religious and spiritual transcendence. And so this is what we hear during that cinematic epilogue. We'll hear the hope melody played in the flute, immediately responded by the main theme coming back full circle. And so that concludes my talk. Now, I just want to briefly mention that these are just the Super Nintendo era games, and there's a bunch of stuff I couldn't talk to because of time constraints. So if you look at the music from the PlayStation era, it's even more expansive from Final Fantasy 7, 8, and 9. The same types of techniques are still within these stories. So I hope that this not only gives you an appreciation for the composer and his music, but also how to listen perhaps more critically when you're listening to or watching a film or playing a video game, paying close attention to the music and how it not only may confirm your expectations as an audience member and not only subvert your audience expectations, but also how it may even interact directly with the drama in front of you. And so with that, I hope you enjoyed the talk and I hope you enjoy the concert. Thanks for coming.